Hey guys. Okay, friends. This is the raw and unfiltered Penny. I don't know if I can get through this, but I'm going to try. I realized today one of my sweet friends was asking for a video of me talking about my health history. And while I know I've shared it and I try to share it every chance I get, I think that some of my original videos that I made that explained my history, I was not very careful with using medical terminology, and so I needed to take them down. So I'm going to try very hard to give a history of my Crohn's disease and my illness, to share with other people, because I know a lot of people have asked for my story, and I'm more than happy to share it. It took a while for me to get to that, but there's a lot of things about my story that have started coming up as I've tried to write a book, and kind of giving me some anxious feelings. So I felt moved to do this right now, and I got to do it while I feel moved. Otherwise, I may never do it again. So bear with me, and I hope that I can get through this. I do have notes to make sure that I speak properly, without misusing words, and making sure I get everything I'm saying across. But so I've started a new blog called my cbdoilstudio.com, and in that blog, I'm sharing my history, where you can find much of what I'm going to say, and I'm also just sharing what I learn about healthy living, natural remedies, CBD, things like that. This has always kind of been my passion, is to help someone else with what I've gone through. So I'm happy to share all these things with you, but I have a long history of Crohn's disease, and I really can't even be exact with how many years, because I don't do math in my head, but it probably started when I was 16 is when I first had my first symptoms. But they were mild symptoms, didn't even go see a doctor, but I had, tummy burning. I had weight gain, like for no reason whatsoever. I played tennis 7 days a week, and I gained weight, which in hindsight, I know that was kind of a yeast issue. But so I will be 46 next week. So that's 30 years. I've had Crohn's for 30 years. Was not diagnosed until I was 24, because I had emergency surgery to open up my stomach. My stomach was swollen shut. So from 16 till 24, I was in college and then graduate school and then working my first job. So everywhere I went, I had a new doctor. Amazing doctors. I always had amazing doctors. When you got to talk about your poop with someone, you got to have a good relationship. And they took excellent care of me. But my problem was I kept having to change doctors. So each doctor kind of felt like I had Crohn's, but none of the test results ever came back positive for that. So at the time, also Crohn's is located in the colon for most people. So all the medication that was created at that time was made to release in the colon. We didn't have biologics yet, so no medication was working for me at all. So that's just a little bit of the back history. But I'm an open book. As I said, I've had some grueling experiences that I'll share a few of those with you. A lot of them I can't go to, but also really exciting points on my journey. So a long time ago, I can't even remember what year it was, but I started a blog called My Intestimony, meaning my intestine noni, because I had done a Bible study that was talking about what your purpose was in life. And my purpose, I had no idea. I had 3 kids, and I was just barely surviving and keeping my head above water. So I decided, after a neighbor told me that she didn't know that I was as sick as I was, because I never wanted to tell people, hey, guess what, I'm sick. But with Crohn's, if you feel good, you're out and about. But if you don't feel good, I was at home. And so people didn't know when I wasn't feeling good, because I was at home and nobody missed me. Not nobody missed me, but nobody missed me. So anyway, so I started this blog, and through this blog, my intention was to share, up to that point, my story. And almost as soon as I shared it, it was amazing how people came to me and said, I want you to talk to my mom, or will you talk to my sister? Tell me about the diet that you did. Tell me about the food that you eat, because I do have special things, or I've learned a way to eat that's now normal for me, but just simple substitutions that kept me out of pain. So what I love about, as I've created this new blog, CBD Oil Studio. I've gone through, tearfully read through my testimony, and I can, at the end of each of my blogs, I said, I can't wait to tell you how this story ends. It was crazy. I didn't mean to say that, but my end of my blog was, I can't wait to see how this story ends. I can't wait to see how this story ends. And it's so strange to me because it was never a deliberate or intentional statement. So now I can tell you how the story ends. To God be the glory. But I am on the other side of that story, and it's a place that I always hoped and prayed for, but I really never dreamed that I would achieve on this side of heaven. I mean, there were many nights that while I didn't say it out loud, I was braced because I was in such excruciating pain that can drive, I mean, no matter what kind of discomfort you're in, whether it be your back or whatever, it drives you insane. So I was ready to be healed. Like if that meant going to heaven, then I was ready for that healing. So my family kept me going, of course, but I will, let's see, my Crohn's is rare, and that I told you that Crohn's is mostly located in the colon for most people. And most people, if they have anything removed, is their colon, which is why they have ostomies. But my Crohn's is only in my stomach and my upper small intestine. So I have a beautiful, pink, healthy colon. And that's what really stumped everybody for so many years, is that my colon was healthy. But my problem was my stomach was inflamed. And so when your stomach's inflamed, it swells shut and you can't eat and you can't drink and you throw up everything that you eat. So my symptoms were not the typical Crohn's symptoms. I was vomiting all the time. And I couldn't, I mean, when I couldn't drink water anymore is when I had emergency surgery. And I had that twice. Before I was ever married, actually, I had my last surgery, March of 2001. And I met my husband in May of 2001. So he truly never knew me unhealthy for a period of time. He had, bless his heart, no idea what he was getting into with me. But I was incredibly ill at that time, and gratefully, I kind of made a decision after graduate school to go back to Tulsa, which is close to my parents' house, because I knew that I wasn't well and I had them to fall back on, and I moved back in with them twice to recover from those surgeries. So I was healthy when I met my husband, when we were dating, and when I got married, and I was healthy until I remember the exact day that I made a turn for the worst. We had been out to dinner and we had just found out that my husband's job was somebody had bought out my husband's company. We didn't know if we had a job. We didn't know if we were moving. We were hoping we were moving because that meant he had a job, but it meant we were leaving our family. I had 2 babies at the time. We were going to be 12 hours away now. I broke out in hives. I'd never had hives before. My stomach began to hurt again. Food started to react differently with me again. And then I started to vomit. And so, I mean, I knew that everything was getting worse. So the stress of the move and the job changes triggered my already fragile body. I would never have said it was fragile then, but it was fragile. But I was in and out of doctors' offices and ERs and hospitals for the next 10 years. And that one statement covers a whole lot of territory there. But that envelops a whole lot of hurting and a whole lot of pain. My boys were little. In fact, when we moved to Houston, I only had 2. I went to the ER so often with excruciating pain, usually related to some sort of blockage or swelling, or my iron was super low that I needed infusions. When my iron gets so low, it gets down to like a 4, which is ridiculously low. I figured out my bones hurt. I can't get comfortable. I can't sleep. Like it's just excruciating pain. But my husband and I had a system, which he was not a great fan of, but it was the only thing we could do because I never wanted to disrupt my kids' schedule. So I would bear it until we got them in bed, and then I would drive myself to the ER, whichever ER it happened to be at the time, with my phone on speaker in the passenger seat while John talked me to the hospital so he could stay home with the kids. Hindsight, it's kind of crazy I did that. I remember crawling on all 4s into one of the ERs. I'm sure they thought I was either drunk or high, but I was in so much pain I could not stand up and walk in. And that ended up being a hospital stay and an admission because my blood was so low that I needed multiple transfusions, which when it was the first time I needed a transfusion, you have to sign these papers, basically signing your life away if you get any sort of transmitted disease. And I bawled and I refused. I can't believe I refused. But at that time, oh, I can't even begin to discuss the extremes that my family went for me. My mother-in-law dropped everything, drove to the closest city, gave her blood. She's a universal donor, shipped blood to me overnight. My dad got on a plane. He's a universal donor, flew down to Houston. My entire family of my husband's family, they all have O positive blood, which is saving grace. So I was able to get those infusions. It took a couple days, but we got family blood. But let's see. That was the beginning of the blood transfusions. And I also remember another time doing this again, driving into the ER, where my next door neighbor was an ER doctor. And so he called ahead for me and told his buddy that was on call that I was coming. And I remember calling my mom and calling my best friend who lived in Katy, saying, just in tears, just pray, because the pain was so great. I didn't know how I was going to get from the parking lot to the front desk at this ER, because this was a bigger hospital. And I remember as soon as I hung up with them, this amazing lifting. I had no pain. I walked into the ER, I got to the desk, and I ended up in a ball on the floor, which is excruciating pain. I mean, it was just, you can't separate my illness from my faith, because there's so much woven together and prayers being answered throughout my entire time that, while maybe at the time I didn't know there were prayers being answered, in hindsight, I'm like, oh my gosh, I can't believe that. So that time, of course, ended in another hospital visit. And that visit turned into when we started discussing, I was sent to Houston to talk to a doctor about removing my stomach. And I said, whatever, no way, I'm not doing that, which was the beginning of the end. But I remember one time when I still lived in Tulsa, so I probably only had one baby, but my sister lived there and she was able to come take me to the ER, and I was in so much pain. And when you have pain, it's kind of like a waxing and a waning, because it hurts as food is moving through your stomach. I could feel my food passing each of my strictures in my stomach. So as it would get to that tight spot, it would just excruciating pain, and it would, I tried very hard, but it would make you yell or moan. And it was a really heavy time at the hospital. And I remember my sister saying, just keep moaning, because every time I moaned, someone scooted further away from me. I wasn't laughing at the time, but my spot in triage moved forward quite rapidly the louder I moaned and the more I moaned. But I never wanted to be a burden to anyone around me. I didn't share my illness much, as I told you, until my friend told me about it, and I felt like there were more people getting Crohn's when I was diagnosed. I had never heard of Crohn's before. I thought it was a terrible name. I didn't want to have that disease. So the only people that really knew about my illness, apart from my close friends, that were my kids. And I always tried to put on a brave face around my kids, as we all do. And I realized that Jake was my oldest, and while he was, basically I had Crohn's since he was born, but he knew things that I didn't realize he knew. And I remember one time running to the bathroom and throwing up and then coming back, because after I threw up, I'd feel better. That pressure and that relief was gone. And he looked at me in his little lisp and said, "Mommy, did you throw up again?" And it just broke my heart that my kids worried about me, because Jake worried about me. He would then bring me a glass of water, or, he'd do those things. And it broke my heart. But, I would be driving down the road with 3 kids in car seats and jump out, throw up, hop back in the car again, thinking they didn't see me, or I'd say I was checking the tire, and Jake always knew. So because I said my battle's entwined with my faith, like I said, there were times that I didn't realize that my prayers were being answered, but of late, as I've gotten involved in a lot of Crohn's groups and discussions, I realized that what an incredible blessing that not only was I able to get married and I had a social life, that I had 3 incredibly relatively healthy pregnancies. My last one, I was high risk, but it was uneventful. But I had 3 babies, and while I was pregnant, I had no problems at all. It was like I was in remission. It was amazing. One reason to want to be pregnant, but at the same time, after each pregnancy, I got significantly worse. So it would be, it's like it was catching up. Um, so that was a huge answer to prayer that at the time I didn't realize. But I could share so many ways of my daily ins and outs of battling just illness on a daily basis that I'm sure so many people can relate to. But the getting up, the throwing up when I was places, or I'd be sitting in church and I'd have to run to the bathroom and go to throw up. I mean, I had people that confronted me out of concern, thinking I had an eating disease, an eating illness, eating related illness. So I always had to explain. I mean, yeah, I kind of do, but it's not what you think. So I did have a lot of fight and a lot of determination to be normal. All I wanted to be normal, but my body was getting weaker and weaker until I reluctantly agreed on the third or fourth doctor that told me I needed to have my stomach removed. And that just sounds absolutely crazy to me and probably to you. And people still are like, how do you live without a stomach? Honestly, I feel better than I've ever felt before. But I went to the best of the best. I lived in Houston. I was at the Houston Medical Center, and we still got a second opinion by going to Mayo Clinic. That doctor, when I walked in, looked at me and told me I should be in a wheelchair. That was my greeting. Hey, you're sick. Why aren't you in a wheelchair? So he kind of empowered me to fight even harder. He was the one who told me that if I was on the Oregon Trail, he would bet on me making it to Oregon. But that was another time that I realized what an answer to prayer, that you can't look at me and tell how sick I am. My insides were awful, but nobody looked at me and could tell how sick I was. But I finally ended up, my doctor in the Woodlands sent me to a doctor at University of Texas Medical Center in Houston, and this gastroenterologist said, there's no way to move forward without taking care of the stomach, then we can take care of other things. So forever changed at that point, because we decided to move forward with removing my stomach. And there's a good ending. I promise. There's a good ending. You can tell I'm here. But in the process of removing what ended up being 80% of my stomach, I got to keep 20% at the very top that was healthy. They unknowingly nicked 3 spots in my colon and my stomach and my duodenum. So your colon is obviously the end part of your stomach. That's where most people have Crohn's, but they nicked me there. They nicked me somewhere at the exit of my stomach, and then right when your stomach meets your small intestine, that's called the duodenum or duodenum, depends on who says it. But we didn't know that they had nicked me in 3 spots. I was released from the hospital in Houston with temperature spikes and with high white blood cell counts. I had a reaction to an antibiotic called red man syndrome. Got really puffy and really red, and my entire body peeled. It was like, as my home health nurse says, it was a free body scrub or whatever. I completely exfoliated. So at about 4 weeks at home, number one, was the first time that I had a home health nurse taking care of my wound. The other 2 surgeries, I healed, got back to work, and was working by 6 weeks. And I was at 4 weeks. I had this home health nurse. She was up to packing my wound twice a day. And I remember looking at her saying, this isn't right. Like, I realize I'm older, but I'm not healing. And in fact, my wound was actually popping open. It's gross. But she was amazing. She was very good at what she did. And so my surgery for my stomach was on May 4th of 2015. And after 4 weeks of home health care packing my wound, I was open. They sent me home open. So from sternum to the top of my pubic bone, I was wide open, which was disgusting and gross. It's nothing I ever looked at. I never watched very often, but I wasn't healing. And when I was in the hospital, I've been sick forever. And then I was in the hospital for 2 weeks. And then I was home for 4 weeks. And I was just kind of at a standstill. And I had precious boys, ages 6, 9, and 11. And there were end of year school parties, and there were end of year baseball parties, and, kids getting awards. I didn't want to be sitting at home while my kids were doing this. So I was going to these things while I was slow, and I had a chauffeur because I wasn't supposed to be driving. If you saw underneath my shirt, I had a really nasty wound that was packed all around me. I mean, I could touch Felt like I could touch my organs. But in this time, I remember, this is where my mom needs to cut because she won't like this, but I remember looking at my mom and asking her when was my, when do I get to get healed? Like, I believe we've prayed for 20 years. Like, when do I get my chance to say I'm healed? I was just getting so weak, and my inner strength may have been strong, but I just wanted to be healed. I mean, I've been fighting for a long time, and I think most people with chronic illness know that desperation. And of course, we both ended crying, and we didn't know, and I felt like I was losing my fight, but all the while, I had dreamed of what's healing, like, poof, I'm healed. Like, it was like that, poof, you're healed. And what I didn't realize, that God was weaving my story, even in that moment, by me sitting here and getting to tell you. I specifically said, when is my moment of healing, that I would be bold enough to tell it. I have a strong faith, but I'm not someone who stands out and just shouts it from the mountaintop. But it took me getting to the bottom of the barrel, and we're talking the bottom of the barrel, for me to have the strength to share everything, like everything, to share everything that I've experienced, the prayers that we've seen answered, so anyone can listen. And that's really my passion. So if you get sick of me talking about CBD, it's because I'm not stopping, because I think I can help someone, and I know that I can help prevent someone from getting to the point where I got, because of the power of an anti-inflammatory, anything on an inflammatory illness. So what I didn't know then was that I was walking around near-death septic. I didn't know I'd been nicked, like I said, and at this point, basically, infection was just, my wound was opening, which meant that there was infection from the inside out. My original surgeon was completely apathetic. We were not impressed with him with follow-up care. I was eating a grape, like a grape. That's all I ate for one meal. I had no nutritional follow-up, but my wound care nurse was amazing, and she finally found a way to get me to a wound care specialist that was actually closer to my home, which turned out to be a huge blessing, because she wanted me to have a wound vac. And funny, because I was scared of a stinking wound vac, and I was annoyed that I would have to carry something with me over my shoulder. I mean, I had no clue. I had no idea how sick I was. So that wound care specialist took one look at me and said, I want you to go home, I want you to pack your bags, and I want you to promise me that you will be back here in 2 hours. 2 hours. And I mean 2 hours. So I drove there alone. I was to the point where I had to keep going. I couldn't just sit at home in my bed. So I was covered up in infection, and I went home, packed my bag, called John at work, who was at work. At this point, my family, they wanted to go back to their life too. So I was able to function. So my family had left, and I called John and I said, I think they're kind of worried about me. And he came and met me at home. And by the next morning, we had a lot of decisions on whether we stay here in Tomball, Texas, or go back to Houston, which is the Mecca, but they're the ones who messed me up. I was on the operating table the next morning really fast. So I have a picture in my blog of me in bed with my boys at the hospital in Tomball when I had gone back to see the wound care surgeon, and she told me to come back. And I knew in my heart something is wrong. I remember calling my mom saying, I think they think something's really wrong with me. I'm not really sure what. I mean, I had no idea about sepsis. I had no idea what was going on with me. But I'd already been away from my kids for 2 weeks in the hospital, an hour away. So it was over Mother's Day, and like I said, end of year stuff. Like, it was really hard for me to be away. And then I was at home for 4 weeks in bed, not able to do anything for them. So their days with mom was spending time sitting in bed with me. And then from that point on, from that picture on, I didn't leave the hospital for 6 more weeks. So it was a really long and emotional summer. So kind of covered that. There were no more, I think there was one more picture actually that we have of my mom. I don't know why my mom pulled out the camera, but she took a picture of me. It was awful because I actually was getting, my insurance was downsizing me to another hospital with less care, which lasted 24 hours before they nearly killed me and I went back to my hospital. But other than that, I don't have pictures. I don't have pictures of my stay. It was awful, except for the day that I discharged, which was glorious. So in those 6 weeks, I had 5 more surgeries to repair and remove infection and abscesses that they found over my entire abdominal cavity. They had MRI, they could see these balls, and they literally went in and manually removed, scrubbed everything. And the reason there were 5 surgeries is every time they thought they got it, then they didn't, then they couldn't find one of the places where they nicked me. It was so small, and then my white blood cells would go back up. I mean, it was just a back and forth. So I literally would have surgery. They never closed me, and because they didn't want to close me until they were sure that I was infection free. But of course, I would start to heal in that week, and then they'd go in and they'd cut me back open again. And that is not their fault, but it was just gross. And I had wound care. Wound care was really hard. And I was that patient that you hear screaming down the hall because it's just horrible to have someone jabbing and poking and cleaning out your stomach. Just leave it at that. But I had 10 IV antibiotics. 10 antibiotics because they didn't know which one was working. And when I asked, as I eventually knew that my white blood cells had stopped increasing, I asked if we could take some antibiotics away, and they said, absolutely not. We have no idea which one is working. Your life depends on these antibiotics. So I had 2 IV poles that I had to push around, which made mobility a trick. I had a central line. I had 6 drains that I called my basket of eggs across the bottom of my stomach. So they hurt, they tugged, and they go through your muscle bellies. After my second surgery, I got a colostomy, which was temporary, thank goodness, but that sucked. I had a wound vac. So even though they left me open, they had this huge sponge they pack inside of you and put a vacuum on it, which helps with healing, which really was quite amazing, and it prevented infection. Catheter. I mean, I had so many things coming out my body. After a few of the surgeries, I was on the cardiac floor, wired up with monitoring. I guess they had some troubles with me in surgery. Like I said about the wound care, I just felt like I can relate it to feeling like I was on the battlefield, the war stories that you watch where people are getting operated on with no anesthesia. Like it was that bad. And I had all sorts of medicine on board immediately and IVs, and it didn't cover it. Let's see, I had those kind of medicines and pumps and IVs and needles and pills. I had kind of pumps that you get after you have a baby for discomfort. That was one of the worst nights of my life. I had a surgery that ended up taking until like 10 o'clock at night to happen. And when I woke up, it was about, I don't know, 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, and I couldn't move. I had so much pain, discomfort, and they hadn't given me the proper amount, the proper dose. And I remember I couldn't even get breath out of me to call my husband, who was sleeping on the couch, to say, I mean, I thought that basically that surgery had gone bad and that they had given up. I thought that was the end. I finally got my incredibly deep sleeping husband to wake up, and I was saying, what did they do to me? What is different? Why does it hurt so bad? And he said, nothing. They didn't do anything different. And we found out that I just didn't have enough of the medicine, and it turns out the pump that they had to order was a new pump for the hospital, and I couldn't even pull myself up in bed. Like I couldn't adjust. I just remember not being able to adjust. And I looked over, and those nurses, God love them, they were reading the paper instructions on how to use this pump. It was awful. It probably took from that point 3 more hours for me to get any sort of medicine started because they didn't know how to use the pump. They had to call the OB floor because these were new pumps in the hospital and only the OBs knew how to use them. And then they realized that the pharmacist had sent up the wrong size cartridge, and then they had to send down I'm telling you, talk about losing your mind. It was awful. So I also had TPN. TPN is IV food, and I will say that that is one of the hugest blessings about getting me to the hospital is that I told you I was eating a grape. My protein was so low, my doctor explained it as Ethiopian starving. And there's a point when your protein gets so low, your body doesn't know how to generate anymore. And so, had I not gotten in the hospital and gotten that IV nutrition, I wouldn't have had the nutrition to heal. I mean, it's just so many blessings all around. But by getting that IV food, it just gave me the nutrition I needed for my body to heal because I would never have gotten back from where I was. But let's see. So while I was in the hospital, I had a surgeon, I had an anesthesiologist team that was remarkable. My anesthesiologist would give me high fives every time I came in for surgery, which is sad that every time I came in, I had that many times. Gastroenterologist, infectious disease doctor, interventional radiologist, they had to go in a couple times outside of surgery and poke another drain in using MRI. I had a urologist. I had any number of techs. They all knew my name. I would go into the basement for my CTs, my MRIs. I had HIDA scans, X-rays, and they'd all say, "Oh, hey, you're still here," and I would say, "Yeah, I'm still here." I can never forget the countless amazing nurses that cared for me in the 6 weeks that I was on. I don't know how many different floors. Every time you go to surgery, you come back in a different room. The last, when I came back from that awful experience at the hospital next door, where basically if I hadn't left that hospital, I would have died. My doctor had to come rescue me for the poor nursing that I received. They had put my wound vac on top of my ostomy. So that meant that the vacuum was sucking in what was in my ostomy into my wound. And I kept telling the nurse it was wrong, and she didn't believe me. I was like, I've been watching people do this for weeks. That's not right. I should not be seeing stool go into my wound. It was awful, really awful. So I could easily say that all of this was the absolute 6 weeks of hell, and emotionally it was, and talking about it is a little bit cathartic. It's a little bit anxiety ridden, but it was also the best time of my life. And when I say that, it's because I've never been on the receiving end of so much prayer. And when you're desperate and that's all that you want and need, people wanted to help. How can we help? People that are far away. And I mean, I just desperately said, just pray for me. Just pray that I get the heck out of here. And when you're sitting in a bed for 6 weeks and you're watching and you're waiting and you're expecting for prayers to be answered, it is unreal. We are so busy in our world. I think that we blow past answered prayers every day that we don't see. We don't see the glory because we're too busy. It's like we're in our phone and the whole world is passing us by. I say this to my kids, but when you're waiting and you're expecting prayers to be answered, they are answered in huge ways. And I have blogged on that too. Maybe I'll talk about it another time, but extraordinary. So when I say it was the best time and the worst time, it's because I've never had this incredible feeling of peace. And when I knew that my entire body was weaker than it had ever been, one thing I always joke about, I hate when people tell me that you're the strongest person I know. I was not strong. I did not want to be there. I did not want to fight anymore. I'd been fighting for too long, but I knew I had a strength, and that strength was not me. That strength was coming from the bazillion of people praying for me. And I had multiple times in a day when I would look at my mom or my mother-in-law or my husband, whoever was sitting there with me, I was never alone, and say, someone's praying for me right now. And I remember my mom the first time saying, well, of course they are. Everybody's praying for you. I'm like, no, I mean, like right now, I can feel it. I can feel it. And I have no words to tell you what that feeling is. It was supernatural. So we witnessed those miracles. My quality of life was in jeopardy, but my gosh, it was just really an amazing time. So the great news is, I'm sorry this is getting long, but the great news is that I was eventually released from the hospital on July 17th. So from May 4th, which is when I had the first surgery, I was basically bedridden until July 17th. And July 17th meant I got to go home, which was The Houston humidity had never felt so good. I couldn't even, I mean, when I walked, I had PT and OT, which is quite humbling when you're an OT, acute care occupational therapist. But if I walked, it was like down the hall. I never even got to go outside that entire time. Not that you want to go outside in Houston in the middle of July, but I loved it. And I got to go home, but I mean, I still had a lot of healing ahead of me. But my amazing surgeon, who never ever gave up on me, there were times when he himself had tears in his eyes. Like the last surgery I went into, he really just desperately wanted to find out where the leak was, and we weren't finding that. But it was time for me to go, and I said, you know, Dr. Harkins told me to wait for him. He wants to walk me to my car. And the nurses kind of whispered, and they're like, are you sure? Like, he doesn't do that. And I said, well, he told me to stay here. And sure enough, here he comes rolling around the corner with a wheelchair to take me to my car. He had already given me a room after, which it was when I came back from that awful hospital. He gave me what I call the George and Laura suite. I had like the penthouse of the hospital. I had a living room, I had a kitchen, I had the regular room, and all of that attached. So he told me that nobody deserved to go through what I was going through, and that he wanted my kids to be able to come up and spend time. He made sure there was a TV, and that if they wanted to bring their PlayStation, they could bring their PlayStation up and sit in my room with me. I mean, it was just, he was, you just can't even begin to tell you how amazing he was. But he told me, he said, yep, I'm walking you to my car. And there's a doctor in Texas, probably nationally, that everybody talks about, is Dr. Red Duke. He actually recently passed away, but he was a pretty impressive doctor. And he said that he was his mentor. And Dr. Duke told him, he said, when you have those patients that are your most difficult cases, it's therapeutic for you both, for you to send them off yourself. It's like a good farewell, and you need to walk them to their car and say goodbye, and it closes that chapter. So that's what he did for me. He told me that I was his hardest case that he'd ever had. So he never stopped fighting for me. He had tears in his eyes. A doctor doesn't do that. And for all that time, I finally got to leave, but I left the third hospital and I was 109 pounds. And I am a solid 130, 135 kind of girl. So 109, I was a waif. I still had to leave with an ostomy and a wound vac, and I had a lot of healing to go. In fact, from that point, I still had 3 more surgeries to go. But being home on the couch was the best medicine for me. I was surrounded by my people, my dog, my kids, my friends could come visit me and crawl up in bed with me and sit and talk. It was so it was so helpful to just get out of the hospital. But I have on my blog, I have some pictures that show my slow improvement. But I had an ostomy until right about Halloween, and I was able to successfully have an ostomy takedown. So there was another reason for scarring. You know, I know a lot of people live with those long term, and that takes a lot of strength, because I had some very traumatizing events with that, learning how to use it. And I can't say that I ever mastered it, but it was a blessing, and I count that blessing, because as an occupational therapist, I have been able to help. I can't tell you how many patients I had, like back to back, boom, 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 that were new to ostomies, that I got to sit down and help and tell them the secrets and the tricks and all that. And they just cried and told me, God put you in my life for a reason, which of course made me cry, whatever. So experiences added up for me that I could pass on to other people. But I was so excited when I stopped losing weight at 109 pounds. Like it was bad. So then it took like 2 months, and I got to 111 with my kids' first day of school. And then, let's see, like I said, I got the ostomy removed, and with the next 6 months, I started having some other issues, and it turns out I had what's called a surgical fistula. So it's not the same thing as a fistula from Crohn's disease. I don't have fistulizing Crohn's disease, but basically when your intestines or your body parts on the inside have been touched too many times, it's kind of their defense mechanism, and they develop a fistula. So I had a lot of pain, and I went in, and turned out I had a fistula. So we had to get that removed, had to have surgery again. It was on my birthday. on my birthday, that surgery was. And I had to start with a new wound vac all over again. I thought that thing was gone. Wound vacs are kind of a funny thing because they make a lot of noise when they suck. And I remember always sitting in church, and we kind of had the same people. We all sat in our normal places, and I'd always say, I'm so sorry, it's just a wound vac. I had to like prepare people. It just made me feel better. And I share these moments not to gross anyone out or to provide too much information, because believe me, there's way more that I could tell you that would gross you out, but just to illustrate all these different surgeries, all the different things that were coming out of my body. Everything causes scar tissue. So each time I began to heal from a surgery in the hospital, they opened me back up over and over again. Drains below my belly, those were minor but so painful because they would cause muscle spasms. I even had a spasm that was so bad, my muscle belly ripped, and I ended up back in the ER to fix a muscle tear. I had an incision, like I said, from my sternum to my pubic bone. Everything hurt. You can't, after abdominal surgery, you can't stand up straight. So you feel like you're a shrimp, like you're being pulled forward all the time. And they say, you just got to stand up. You just got to do it. And that is, you want to shoot someone who tells you that. So I would, as a therapist, I would practice doing tummy time. And you can't go straight to tummy because it hurts too bad. So I would build pillows up underneath me and try to lay on the ground, and my kids would help me with tummy time. Anyway, that took a long time, and I had to have, I finally got a massage therapist that did myofascial release that helped me relieve a lot of that scar tissue, because I'm mobile. Got little kids. I play tennis. Every time I exercise, it hurts. So I was really attentive to needing that scar tissue to break up. And I still notice, like I noticed during quarantine when I wasn't exercising or playing tennis as much, I'm tighter again. I can feel it, and I try to rip it and massage it and do all that. But so my final surgery, I get to my final surgery, was to repair my hernia. And the doctor said, it's not if, but when. You've been wide open for so long. We don't want to close you up really tight until we know that you're well. So basically I had to volunteer to come in for that final surgery. And we knew that we might be moving, more than likely going to be moving. And I knew that there was no other doctor that I wanted to touch me besides Dr. Harkins. And so I had that final surgery in May. I can't even remember the date, honestly. It was such a non-event because I've had so many huge surgeries that like stay in the hospital for 2 nights was no big deal. But I had that in May, and we moved to Kansas August 1st. So basically that was, I started getting really bad with my illness when I moved to Houston, and literally as I left, I will mark that as my healing date. So I feel like I was in Houston, whom we love. We feel like we still call that home, but I was there for a reason to, if anything, to meet Dr. Harkins, who saved my life. And since that time, my disease is inactive. I don't have problems, probably minor here and there. I have sensitivity to certain foods if I eat too much sugar or whatever, but I think a lot of people have those issues. But and when he did do my hernia repair, we kind of laughed. He'd always laughed because my belly button, after all those surgeries, got off whack and out of center. It wasn't in the right place. And he did some really good plastics for not being a plastic surgeon, but he got me all lined up again, pulled me in tight. I jokingly say that was my free tummy tuck, but there was nothing free about it. But I look like I've been in a knife fight. No bikinis here, not forever. So that said, the scar tissue continues to redevelop, and I had a really hard time trying to keep it soft, and I still dealt with a large amount of scar tissue and adhesions, like I said, and I still try to rip it. I know that sounds terrible. It hurts, but then it feels better because it loosens it. But because of all that, I became a regular in the managing of discomfort, and I ended up on a mild opiate that I had several times. My family had interventions with me, not huge interventions, but you probably shouldn't be on that. I had been on such huge medicine for discomfort that this was so mild and so minor that I really didn't think anything of it until I started needing it 5 or 6 times a day. And I realized that I really liked it, and I liked the way it made me feel. And I was ready to try something new, but I couldn't because I can't take just over-the-counter anti-inflammatories because my illness is naturally an ulcerating illness, and those tend to cause ulcers. So long about this time, this starts my CBD journey because my friend, after I had talked to my family and in my mind I knew I wanted to go off those medications, Valerie called and told me about CBD oil. And I, like most of you, anybody who's listening to this, if you're still listening, I'd heard about it and I wanted to try it, but I had no idea where I could find anything safe, and over my dead body was I going to run into a dispensary, because I mean I had a friend who said she ran in and ran out crying. So I didn't know who to trust. I didn't know anything about it. I hadn't done any research. So when Valerie approached me about it, I was like, yeah, I'm interested. I didn't tell her that, but it took about a week, and I talked to my husband about it, and I looked, I read up on the company, which was very impressive, and just started realizing that this was a real quality product. And for the record, basically, within 5 days, I tapered off my discomfort medicine. I was using the CBD oil tincture, and then I was using it topically. And I noticed that after 5 days, I mean, when I was using it topically, I was using it 2 to 3 times a day because I was in a lot of discomfort. And after about 5 or 6 days, I realized I wasn't using the topical as much or at all, because I was forgetting, because I wasn't having discomfort anymore because the oil drops were kicking in. So basically, I have used CBD oil successfully to stay off my mild opiates since April 27th. Everybody has a date, right? Of 2019. So it's been over a year. I have not been back on my medicine. I haven't needed anything. On top of dealing with the scar tissue and adhesions, I've had improvement in my sleep. I've had improvement in my joints when I play tennis, and just daily use for common reasons that we use anti-inflammatories. It's unbelievable. The power of inflammation is 30 times that of one single anti-inflammatory pill. So I am a huge believer, and I'm a believer that I am here to share my journey so that I can help anyone who needs it. The key to getting to where I am with Crohn's, inflammatory diseases, you've got to have a positive attitude. I mean, there are so many ways that you could get sucked into poor me, and I feel miserable and I'm so awful. And I was just determined, which I will say that we kind of had some issues in our marriage at times, because I would never want to tell John when I felt bad, and he would get upset because he didn't know I felt bad. And I thought, he should know. You should know I feel bad. But I didn't tell him, and he was like, you have to tell me when you feel bad. Like, I need to know because you don't tell me. So you can't waller, I guess is what I'm saying. It sucks. It's a horrible disease from the devil. Nobody deserves to experience anything about that. But you have to have a positive attitude. I will say my faith and the power of prayer, I can't even begin to say what a huge, if you look at a little pie chart, I would say that's like 90% of my healing. And you have to have a great sense of humor. I mean, to be throwing up all the time, or if you're running to the bathroom, that's why we laughed yesterday when we did a video in front of a porta potty. I mean, there is no way to make it through any sort of illness, but especially an illness that involves your GI system, without a sense of humor, because you'll just curl up and die. Like, there's just so many horrifying experiences, or thinking you're not going to make it to the restroom, but then you do, and then you got to run maybe to a porta potty, which I will say I've never had to do that, thank goodness, but I have certainly had to make many quick stops. But basically, positive attitude, faith, and a great sense of humor. But it's possible to come out on top of illness, and you can do it. And I told my mom, remember, when is my chance for healing? And by golly, I've arrived. And there's nothing more wonderful than knowing that I have an end to my story. And it was a long one, 20 something years, 25, 30 years. But I am here to help people and to share everything that I know to encourage people along their way. So I hope that's not too long for you. I hope that shares for someone who needs to hear what they need to hear, that you hear it. Have a great night.